Maybe you still have your old consoles, but they are either busted, out of reach, or maybe you just can't stand the image quality they produce. This is where emulation comes in. If you are new to the whole emulation thing and don't know where to start, you have come to the right place, because I'm gonna show you the best emulators for PlayStation, Sega, Nintendo and Xbox systems. But just a heads up, we won't be covering emulator front ends like RetroArch or Launchbox that help organize emulators. Also, I'm gonna skip the emulators that come with these front ends, as they might not receive regular updates. For example, we won't be looking into emulators like DuckStation for PS1 or Project 64 for Nintendo 64 and other retro emulators for SNES, Genesis or any other retro consoles. I mean, let's face it, even a potato can handle those emulators. So let's skip those and jump right into the good stuff, right?
Alright.
Oh, and I'm not going to mention the minimum system requirements for those emulators, because they change all the time with new updates, so there's no point. But just to give you an idea, here's the specs of my potato PC. Alright, now that's out of the way, let's jump right into the video.
Okay.
Let's kick off the video with PCSX2, the emulator for the best-selling console, PlayStation 2. Now, PCSX2 requires BIOS to boot up games, but with a quick YouTube search, you should be able to know how to get them in no time. Once PCSX2 is installed, it's super stable and rarely crashes. What's even more impressive is that out of the over 4,300 games in the PS2 library, PCSX2 can run more than 97% of them in playable state. That means you can enjoy classics like God of War, Gran Turismo, Ratchet & Clank, Shadow of the Colossus, Katamari Damacy, Metal Gear Solid and many more. But here's the pro tip, don't just download the regular PCSX2. Instead, go for the PCSX2 nightly build. It's more like an alpha version, but it's way better. It runs more games, it runs faster and it has nicer user interface. Plus, if your PC is not a potato like mine, you can make your PS2 games look amazing by upscaling them into 4K resolution. And many games have widescreen hacks, so you can use them to make almost all games fit your screen better. But one of the coolest features of PCSX2 is its quick save option. You know how old games had terrible save systems that made you wait for hours to save your progress, right? Well, with PCSX2, even for games without frequent in-game save points, you can manually save anywhere you like. That's a huge time saver. Then PCSX2 also works with keyboard and mouse as well as any controller that supports X input. I usually prefer controllers for emulated games, but for some PS2 games with tank controls, like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, keyboard and mouse can actually be better. And another reason to use PCSX2 is for those really old games that don't work on modern PCs due to compatibility issues. Because sometimes it's easier to just emulate the PS2 version of those games than to try to make their PC version work on your modern system. So PCSX2 is an awesome emulator that doesn't require hefty resources to run your favorite PS2 games on your PC. If you haven't tried it yet, what are you waiting for?
Do it! Just do it!
Dolphin is also one of the best emulators out there, because it offers a unique 2-in-1 solution by flawlessly running both Nintendo GameCube and Wii games. And Dolphin is a great way to get into emulation if you are new to it, because it's super easy to set up. You don't need any BIOS or firmware files to install it in your PC. Just download it, open it, select the game image and boom, that's it. Dolphin is also very stable and it can run most of the games from the GameCube and Wii libraries. It can handle over 650 games from the GameCube library and an impressive 97% of Wii library with nearly 1,600 games, which includes world-class titles like Zelda, Super Mario, Metroid, Eternal Darkness, MGS Twin Snakes, Animal Crossing, Pikmin and many more. And Dolphin has a user-friendly interface that lets you easily manage your games and apply patches. Plus, it supports features like resolution upscaling up to 5K, widescreen support, VSync, and much more. For input methods, it supports keyboard and mouse, controllers, and even Wii sensor bars for motion-centric games. Actually, I would recommend using a controller for GameCube games, but you can also use keyboard and mouse, because classic controller schemes of GameCube games will work great with them. However, many Wii games use motion controls that are hard to replicate with a controller. So I think keyboard and mouse is the best option if you don't have a Wii sensor bar and Wii controllers. I mean, you can also try using a controller for Wii games, but it might take some tinkering with the emulator settings and trial and error to figure out how to play them. The other cool thing about Dolphin is that it's still being developed and updated regularly, which ensures improved compatibility and performance. So Dolphin is a great way to play your old GameCube and Wii games, even if you don't have those consoles anymore. Sounds great, right? The next emulator I picked is CXBX Reloaded, which emulates OG Xbox games. On the other hand, there's another emulator for OG Xbox games called XEMU, which is the go-to emulator for many fans. However, in my personal experience, CXBX Reloaded gave me the best performance with the default settings. And compared to XEMU, which requires BIOS to install, CXBX is very simple and straightforward. Even though they say XEMU can run more than 75% of Xbox games, many of them didn't work well for me. Where CXBX Reloaded can't play as many Xbox games on paper, it manages to handle most games well, at least in my experience. Of course, your mileage may vary, so you can try them both and see which one works well for you. And for those who try them both, what do you guys think? Which one is the best?
Well, I would think that...
It doesn't matter what you think.
Anyways, you can also play many Xbox exclusives on your PC with CXBX Reloaded, like Jet Set Radio Future, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Ninja Gaiden Black, Project Gotham Racing, and many more with great performance. The UI also simple and easy to understand in both emulators, but XEMU has a nicer look, and both of them lets you improve your games with features like widescreen and graphics upscaling options. Also, CXBX Reloaded has full controller support and decent keyboard and mouse support as well. And CXBX Reloaded is still being developed and updated regularly. So if you have trouble playing some game today, it might work better soon with the latest updates. Still, Xbox is not the most popular console like PlayStation 2, but as you might already know, it was the most powerful console in its generation. So many of the Xbox ports of third-party games are the best versions of those games. Therefore, CXBX Reloaded is a great option to play your classic games on PC.
Service and the respect of my fellow soldiers is all the reward I ask.
Chief, Samuel L. Jackson is handing out the awards.
Alright, so far we have looked at the emulators for home consoles. But before we move on to other advanced home consoles, let's cover the handheld emulators with PPSSPP for PlayStation Portable. PPSSPP is super user-friendly. Just download, install and play. Also, it's incredibly stable too. However, it might not have the compatibility ratio of PCSX2 or Dolphin. Some games work perfectly, some don't, but when they do... Anyway, PSP has over 1900 games in its huge library, which means if you manage to run PPSSPP, you can play the best games made for PSP, such as God of War Chains of Olympus and Ghost of Sparta, Resistance Retribution, Pursuit Force, MGS Peace Walker, GTA Story Series, and many more. And even though these games are handheld games, they are not always watered down versions of their console counterparts. They pack a serious punch. Plus, playing these games at 60 FPS with upscale graphics is awesome. Also, the PSP games are designed for its widescreen display. Thus, all PSP games are natively widescreen. Therefore, there's no need to force them to be widescreen. So, running PSP games on PPSSPP on a widescreen display looks natural. The only hiccup I had with PSP is that it had just one thumbstick. So, we had to aim and walk with the same thumbstick most of the time, which is not the most convenient, and playing on PPSSPP doesn't fix this. However, once you get used to its control scheme, it becomes second nature. And when it comes to the UI, PPSSPP has the most unique UI of all the emulators in this video. Therefore, it's very easy to use, and it allows you to operate the whole emulator with a controller as well. And PPSSPP also has a quick save feature just like in PCSX2 and Dolphin. So even when a game doesn't have many in-game save stations, we can manually save anywhere we want. And one of the most unique features of PPSSPP is that many emulators have controller profiles to store the key bindings, which forces us to use only one type of input method at once. We can use a controller and keyboard simultaneously. However, PPSSPP allows us to assign multiple buttons for any given action with any input device. So this enables us to use keyboard and mouse or controllers together. However, in games with regular QTEs like God of War, it's a pain in the ass when using keyboard and mouse. Anyway, PPSSPP is a damn good emulator for playing your favorite PSP games with upscale visuals on a big screen.
Damn good.
Citra is another emulator for the best handheld competitor for PSP, the Nintendo 3DS. Citra is developed by the same team that made the amazing Nintendo Switch emulator Yuzu. But unlike Yuzu, Citra lets you jump right into 3DS games without the hassle of installing any firmwares. However, I don't have much experience with this emulator, so I can't say much about its stability. But from what I've seen, it's been pretty stable. And Citra can run almost 80% of the games from massive 3DS games library, with almost 2000 games with decent performance, which means you have a huge chance of running your favorite games on this emulator. So if you manage to run Citra, you can enjoy great 3DS games like Super Mario 3D Land, Zelda, Animal Crossing, Metroid Samus Returns, Fire Emblem, Mario Kart, Luigi's Mansion, and many more. And Citra also has a clean and easy to use interface like Yuzu. Plus, it can upscale graphics up to 4K as well. However, the really cool part is that the Nintendo 3DS had dual displays. Citra emulates this feature perfectly, letting you experience the games that the way they were meant to be played. Normally, the primary display is for the main game, and the secondary display shows important things like maps or inventory. So Citra gives you several ways to arrange these dual displays. You can put both displays on a single screen with two different windows, or if you have dual monitors, you can put one display on each monitor. This gives you enough options to customize the dual displays to match your setup. This is actually a cool way to play 3DS games. This approach brings a whole new level of immersion and gameplay experience compared to conventional single display games. And Citra supports both controllers and keyboards. However, it doesn't have native mouse support, but if you really want to use one, you can set it up with apps like Mouse to Joystick and VJoy, but that's a bit of a hassle. However, like PPSSPP, Citra is also an up-to-date and amazing emulator that won't drain your PC, so it lets you play your all 3DS games in a spectacular fashion.
Yeah.
Alright, now we are moving from handheld to home console emulators again. Let's take a look at an emulator that runs games from the last console Sega ever made, the Dreamcast. Actually, there are a bunch of other Dreamcast emulators out there. The most popular one is Redream, but you have to pay for the premium version for around $6 to use the most basic features that other emulators offer for free, like graphics upscaling. However, considering Redream's insane compatibility, running more than 95% of nearly 600 Dreamcast games, that $6 feels like a steal. But if you're too broke like me, you can use Flycast, which is also in the same league as Redream.
Don't let your dreams be dreams.
Flycast is very easy to set up and it never crashed on me. Plus, Flycast is compatible with nearly 90% of the Dreamcast library, including hit Dreamcast games like Jet Set Radio, Shenmue, Soul Calibur, Resident Evil Code Veronica, and many more. Its user interface is very simple, and unlike Redream, you don't have to pay a dime for simple features like graphic upscale and widescreen because it's totally free. However, its widescreen mode has its quirks, because when rendering in 16:9 aspect ratio, sometimes it reveals things that are hidden in 4:3 aspect ratio. That's a little distracting, but if you don't mind it, you can just ignore it, or you can turn off the widescreen option. And in terms of controls, Flycast offers full controller support with automatic button mappings, which automatically assign all buttons of a controller so you don't have to do it manually. But if you want, you can also remap the buttons as well. However, even though it supports the keyboard, setting up mouse is kind of complicated, so using a controller is a better option. Anyway, since Dreamcast was a phenomenal game console but sadly a failed one, there are not many games made for it, and many games that were initially exclusive to Dreamcast were also ported to other platforms, so there's not much to play. However, to play those games that are still stuck on Dreamcast, Flycast is a perfect emulator.
Nice.
Now let's get to the big guns with RPCS3, the emulator for PlayStation 3 games.
Okay.
But a quick disclaimer, this is the only emulator that you need a somewhat high-end PC to run, because as the PS3 had a totally different hardware setup compared to a standard PC, it's extremely hard to emulate PS3 games on PC. However, this is a very stable emulator, and RPCS3 can run more than 68% of the huge library of PS3 games, which has over 2,500 games. And if you have a beefy PC, you can even run the games in the in-game state with decent performance, which means nearly 90% of PS3 games can be played on high-end PCs. However, installing RPCS3 requires the latest PS3 firmware, and it feels somewhat complicated, but that's not a big deal. Just think about those PS3 exclusives like Killzone 2 and 3, Heavenly Sword, MGS4, Infamous 1 and 2, and Gran Turismo 5 that are still trapped on the PS3. And let's not forget some other PS3 exclusives like Uncharted Trilogy, The Last of Us, and God of War 3, which you can find on other Sony platforms. You can play all those legendary games with better frame rate and upscale graphics if your PC can run RPCS3. These games are still amazing, and they can probably not only compete with modern games, but beat them in terms of game design and gameplay. Last week I made a video about some of those games that aged well, so you can check that video from here. RPCS3 also has a great user interface that's easy to understand, so it makes it easier to manage your games and apply patches. And RPCS3 provides full control and keyboard mouse support, so you can use any input method you want. But using a controller like Retro Fighters Defender or official DualShock 3 or 4 is a better choice in my opinion. Since RPCS3 is still in development, it keeps getting regular updates. So as it's currently limited to relatively high-end PCs, we can expect it to be more optimized and run games on mid-tier PCs as well. That said, grabbing a PS3 might still be the most budget-friendly option instead of upgrading your rig just to play PS3 games.
Okay.
Now let's get to the emulator that runs games from Nintendo's most failed console, the Nintendo Wii U. This is one hell of an emulator, but setting it up can be a bit of a hassle. You need hooks and this and that, but using a software called Wii U USB Helper can make the installation process much easier. However, if you manage to set this one up, you are in for a treat, because Cemu is an incredibly stable emulator. It's so stable that sometimes I forget that I'm playing games on an emulator. It handles games like Zelda Breath of the Wild, Wind Waker, Mario 3D World, Bayonetta 2 and Xenoblade Chronicles X at a buttery smooth 60 FPS without a single hiccup. So for games released on both the Switch and Wii U, running the Wii U version on Cemu often offers more stable performance than running the Switch version on Yuzu or Ryujinx. Also, among nearly 800 games from Wii U library, Cemu can run almost 80% of them with great performance. Even though the installation takes a little bit of work, the user interface in Cemu is designed in a way to make it easier to manage games, DLCs, game patches and updates. Plus, one of the best features I found is Cemu's support for mods in Wii U games. This means you can do cool stuff like enabling ray tracing, which is a fantastic addition. However, among those great features, the downside of Cemu is that it doesn't provide a good keyboard and mouse support. Therefore, like in Citra, we have to go for a little detour of using mouse to joystick and VJoy to make it happen. However, setting up the keyboard and mouse will give you a PC-like experience. But since Wii U games are designed with the controllers in mind, it's hard to replicate the exact same functionality of a controller with keyboard and mouse. So it's always better to play with a controller. Actually, not just Cemu, but every other emulator that emulates modern games are better to use with a controller due to the complexity of their controller mappings, unlike PS2 games. However, Wii U was a phenomenal video game console but sadly a failed one, mostly due to its hardware gimmicks like chunky Wii U gamepad with a touchscreen. But there's no argument that Wii U games are very innovative, maybe too innovative at some point. Even some of the best-selling games on Nintendo Switch like Mario Kart 8 are originally Wii U games and then ported to Switch. Therefore, Cemu is an emulator that shouldn't be overlooked. So it's always better to give it a chance.
I'm ready to go in, coach. Just give me a chance.
Alright, now let's move on to one of my favorite emulators, Xenia for Xbox 360. Even though it's one of the most advanced emulators out there, it's also the most primitive looking one. But Xenia is very easy to set up. However, at first you only see some files and folders like this, so it might be a bit confusing. However, Xenia doesn't need any firmwares or BIOS. You just need to know how to use it. Once you get the hang of it, it becomes second nature. But instead of just installing the standard Xenia Master version, it's better to use Xenia Canary, which is more like a beta version. However, it provides the best compatibility possible with the emulator as it gets updated frequently. Therefore, it can run the Xbox 360 games even on low-end PCs with decent performance. Xenia Canary run more than 2000 games from massive Xbox 360 library. However, this number changes overnight as Xenia Canary receives frequent updates. But with the games I tested, only Forza Horizon and Army of Two didn't run well on it. Also, heavy open world games like Red Dead Redemption may cause it to crash often until it builds the shader cache. But the good news is that the shader cache builds up as we play the games. And as it does, the performance issues will mostly fade away. And also in the 7th generation of Xbox 360 and PS3, there were so many console exclusives. Gears of War 2 and 3, Fable 2, Crackdown, original Saints Row are still Xbox 360 exclusives, and even due to 360's initial success, third-party developers provided extra support for it. So as a result, some multi-platform games like NFS Most Wanted, Gun, Just Cause look better on Xbox 360 compared to other platforms, even PC versions.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Now don't try to fight me in the comments because I said some games looked better on 360 than PC. I mean, it is what it is. It's not my fault that developers made them look better on 360. Alright. One last thing I noticed in the 360 generation is that due to PS3's complex architecture, many third-party games released initially in the 7th generation looked and performed better on 360 than PS3. However, if you manage to set up Xenia, you can enjoy so many Xbox 360 gems on PC. Though some games may have graphic glitches or performance issues, but even these issues are probably already fixed by community patches. And speaking of community patches, the other reason for using Xenia Canary is that you need to have the Canary version to use community patches. However, as this is a primitive looking emulator, it almost has no user interface at all. So if you want to change some settings, you gotta do it on a config text file instead of using a UI. Yeah, it sounds intimidating, but even though this settings file has so many settings, we only use a few of them. And the last issue it has is that it doesn't have a built-in keyboard and mouse support, like many other emulators out there. But with a little effort, you can make them work. However, it detects your Xbox or any X input controller automatically. But don't let these nitpicky things fool you, as Citra is one of the best emulators out there right now. Give it a shot, and you might just be amazed at what it can do.
Oh, come on, it'll be amazing.
Finally, let's talk about the last emulator on our list, which is Yuzu for Nintendo Switch. Actually, Switch has another great emulator called revolutionized, but in my experience, Yuzu gave me the best performance. However, what makes both of these emulators unique is that normally emulators are released or become stable only after the end of the console's life cycle. However, Nintendo Switch is still going strong and still releasing kick-ass games. And even though Yuzu is an emulator that's still in development, it's pretty stable. It hardly ever crashes if you use the latest version of it. It can also run nearly 70% of ever-growing Switch library with more than 4,500 games. Therefore, if this works on your PC, you can play great games like latest Zelda titles, Mario Odyssey, Astral Chain, Animal Crossing New Horizons, Metroid, Bayonetta, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and many more. Yuzu's UI also shares the same DNA as Citra, maybe because the same developers made both emulators. Therefore, Yuzu also lets you easily manage your games, install DLCs and game updates. And Yuzu lets you upscale graphics up to 4K. Plus, since Switch games often use gyro, Yuzu has a handy feature to simulate gyro using your Android smartphone. The other reason I picked Yuzu over revolutionized is that Yuzu provides intuitive input options. Lets you use keyboard and mouse natively and it's seamless, so you can get a PC-like experience with Switch games. However, that doesn't mean using a keyboard and mouse is the ideal option, because Switch games are originally developed with Switch controller layout in mind. Therefore, it might be harder to come up with a sensible button layout similar to PC games, or perform QTEs using keyboard and mouse. So I personally still recommend using a controller, even though it has a great support for keyboard and mouse. And Yuzu is a solid emulator that's still updating. But new games need some time to be playable, and it's good to install both Yuzu and revolutionized, so you can try one if the other doesn't work. So these are the best and stable emulators that will let you play your console games on PCs, even on low-end PCs like mine. However, this video doesn't encourage piracy in any shape or form. But emulation is a great way to play your classic games with better performance and visuals on PC. It's even useful for any gaming content creators who want to record footage from retro consoles that lack HDMI output. Plus, emulation is very valuable for game preservation as well. Anyways, that's it for today's video. And since we only discussed PC emulators, let me know if you're interested in a video about mobile emulators as well. So comment down your favorite emulator in the comment section. And if this video provides any value to you, please consider subscribing to my small channel and share this video anywhere you can.
What are you waiting for? Do it!
So guys, then let's catch up in the next one.
Take care now. Bye-bye then.